Aloha, what's up everyone, and welcome to today's presentation of plasma dragons. So I like the topic of dragons. I've always liked dragons. They're very interesting and mysterious and symbolic. So I thought we'd really get deep into the topic of dragons today. And I'm going to present to you my theory of what dragons originally were. And we're going to separate fact from fiction. We're going to, really just kind of separate the cartoonification and the cartoonified dragons as we know them today as being sort of flying reptilian talking creatures in the movies versus what they really were a long time ago. I believe that during the last cycle we went through, before we went through this reset that changed our world, that things were fantastic, that we lived in a fantastic world full of magic and mysticism and basically everything that we equate with fantasy today. Hopefully everybody in the chat can hear me. Thumbs up if it sounds okay, if you guys can hear me all right. So everything today we're going to be discussing is dragons. We're even going to get into the Dragon Ball. As you can see, there's a picture of the Dragon Ball here. And we'll be talking about the origin of the word. I'm also going to break down the etymology of the word dragon. So I'm going to pull up some pictures here. Just a couple. This is probably what you're most familiar with when it comes to the concept of a dragon. When you think of a dragon, this is typically what people envision. Some sort of crocodile, snake-looking thing with like sort of a horse snout, horns coming off of the sides of its cheeks and its heads, wings, of course, you got to have some wings, scaly, usually fire-breathing and things of that nature, right? All right, cool. So let me just, I'm gonna put on a slideshow so you guys can check out these pictures here. And we'll just start with that one. Thank you so much for everybody in the chat. Good to see everybody. Hey, shout out to everyone, and especially everyone who's been joining my Patreon to jump into the credits after the show. I appreciate that. I hope you guys are enjoying the chat as well. I'm enjoying chatting with you guys in my Patreon chat. That's been a lot of fun for me. Let's start with the word dragon. I love etymology. I love to look up the roots of words to find out their origins, what they originally meant. And whenever I study words, I learned that letters originally were pictures. So if we take one picture and we put it with another picture, we build context. We build a message. We're actually sending a message through pictures. One picture alone is open to all kinds of interpretation. But when we add one letter or a picture with another letter, then we start to force a scene, basically. And that scene is the message that's being conveyed through what we call language today. So dragon, if we take a look at the word dragon, it's in the modern English, it's two different words, okay? It's the word drag, just like to drag something along the ground, and then own. The suffix on, anytime you see on at the end of any type of a word, often it means one who or one of, right? Or something that does something. It's similar to the English er, like maker is someone who makes, right? So a dragon is one who drags, right? So we'll get more specific into it here in a minute. So on is the suffix. It comes from mid-13th century, the word dragon. And there's different ways to pronounce this word and its derivatives and its origins. A fabulous animal common to the conceptions of many races and peoples, from the old French dragon, directly from Latin draconem, a nominative of the word Draco. So the O on Draco is also a suffix, and it means of the, or it means attached to or associated with. So it's associated with the drake or drak. And it implies, or has come to mean, a huge serpent. We're going to talk about that word too, serpent, or dragon. In Greek, it's drakon, which is connected to the word drakontos, which implies a serpent, a giant sea fish. So there's a lot of connections with dragons and bodies of water. Dragons that live in the water or the ocean or come up out of these waters. Apparently from the word drak, D-R-A-K. Strong stem of the word derkastai. So derk would be the root of that word, D-E-R-K. And that means to see clearly. So the word dragon, or the root of that word, also implies vision, or to have some kind of vision, or to be able to see. Let's see. To see clearly, from the Proto-Indo-European word to see, which is also the source of the Sanskrit word darsata, which means visible. In the Old Irish, it is ad kondark, which means I have seen, or the Gothic kadarjan, which means characterize. In Old English, it's tort, torked, or tort. In Old High, and pay attention to these words because there's a lot of modern words that are associated with this and come from this word, tort. It's an interesting word. We'll come back to that one. Old High German, zorat, or zorat, which means light, or bright, or shining, which is where we get the Zohar, right? From like the Jewish mysticism, the breakdown of the Torah. Light or clear. Albanian, drait, which means light, actually. Perhaps the literal sense, and I'm getting this from etymonline.com if you're wondering about what I'm reading from. Perhaps the literal sense is the one with the deadly glance, the one with the paralyzing sight. So people would see these dragons, and sometimes, according to the legends and the myths, they would become paralyzed. Now, by extension, by way of storytelling over time, that could mean many different things. And this is also very similar to the concept of people seeing UFOs and being paralyzed, or aliens and being paralyzed by them. It's energetic in nature. There's something happening energetically when you interact with these energies, which is what these dragons originally were, and the energy of your body, the actual synapses in your mind and your chakras and your actual energetic features, they can disrupt you energetically. Excuse me. They can also hypnotize you energetically. And this is related to, like concepts like vampires and stuff like that, that can hypnotize you with their stare. We also have the young are dragonettes, female form, from dragoness, which was attested from the 1630s. The obsolete word drake, which means dragon, is an older borrowing from the same word, and a later form in another sense is dragoon. Hey, welcome to my channel. High five. Used in the Bible, right? Of course, the devil, Satan, is known as the dragon, the ancient one, the dragon of old. And there's good reason for that. Also, the prince of the powers of the air. These dragons are seen flying through the air all the time, right? They were sky creatures originally until they were brought down low to roam about on the ground, and then brought down even lower than that to be cursed and sent down into the underworld. So we're talking energetically, and if you follow my research on the plasma apocalypse, that makes a lot of sense as far as the plasma originating up there in the sky and then lowering and lowering as the earth charges that energy down into the bowels of the earth. Used in the Bible generally for creatures of great size and fierceness, it translates into Hebrew as tanin, a great sea monster, which in is also a suffix, so the root of that is tan, right? TNN is the root, tanin, or tannin, which is also the bad guy, Biff Tannen, in Back to the Future, and that's why he's called that. He's the great opponent. Now, the word drag, let's take a look at that, right? One who drags. To drag across the ground, to drag along. It doesn't have to be to drag on the ground. These creatures drug along the sky. They dragged about in the sky, moving slowly oftentimes in the actual sky during a time whenever our atmosphere was electromagnetically charged. It was amplified. There was much more electricity ambient in the skies. And we go through these time periods. We go through these fluctuations and cycles and rhythms where our atmosphere is electromagnetically amplified, and there are auroras about, and the glory and the glowing of the heavens descends upon the earth, and people see all kinds of strange and mysterious creatures and spirits and ghosts, sprites and dragons and legendary creatures and mythic creatures of old. And they describe them in different ways as they interpret it through their own perception filters. And then those things change even more over time whenever people don't see them any longer, because the energy dissipates over time and we forget about them. So they try to pass along those stories, and those stories get altered slightly each time. So drag, what does that mean? It means to draw. To draw specifically like you would draw some water, or to move it from one place to another. To draw away by force, or to pull. These dragons were seen pulling along in the skies, or pulling something behind them as well. Drag is from the Proto-Indo-European word drag, right? And that means drag behind, or to drag along, or to drag on the ground. Drag on, dragon, right? So drag, and you'll hear a lot of similar words because over time that's how the languages evolved and changed. To drag, right? Your dregs, you're pulling along something on the behind you, basically. So you'll notice a lot of these pictures. Let me jump back to the pictures before I go back into my notes here. I'm actually going to point some things out here. Now, I believe that these dragons were plasma originally, that they were filaments that were flying about through the sky. But it wasn't just the filaments, that they were just a line or a rope of plasma being dragged through the sky. They oftentimes were seen as having balls in their mouth. Oh my God, that's crazy. Spheres, I should say, in their mouths. Okay, these were the dragon balls. They were sometimes also referred to as dragon pearls. Okay, so you'll see this oftentimes. Sometimes they'll put this sphere, this glowing sphere, just out of reach in front of the dragon as if it's chasing it. Sometimes they'll put it right there into the dragon's mouth. Oftentimes you'll see that in, different architectural sculptures and stuff. But almost every time, many times, this pearl, this sphere is glowing. It's on fire, actually. And the dragon is dragging along behind it. It's chasing it. Sometimes it's seen as an egg. Sometimes it's guarding this pearl of great price, this pearl of value, right? Let me show you a few more examples. So here's another example. You can see it's extremely cartoonified. It's just warped from its original self over time, but still, there are certain elements. They put these pearls out in front of it. They put these spheres out in front of the dragon. The dragon is constantly seen as chasing after this thing of incredible value. This thing of incredible value is life force. It's spirit itself. And it's the dragon portion of it that's moving along is the plasma and the ionized gases that are behind it as they trickle about and trail off. So it's really literally a trail. Here's another sphere. You can see a dragon here and a dragon over there. Sometimes they have the dragon holding on to it. This is the dragon ball. This is a ball of energy. It's ball lightning, quite actually. Here it is again. Let me see if I can find some more. You could kind of see a little sphere in its mouth there, the pearl. And take a look at these dragons and how they're portrayed. The older ones especially, the Eastern style of dragons, where they look more like snakes and snake figures. This one's really interesting to me too because it's wrapped around this building, which is what these dragons would do. They would be seen as attacking these buildings because it's energetically drawn to certain places and certain areas and certain materials that the architecture was made out of. So the architecture during these times of the dragons was built to work with those energies or against them, to keep the dragons away, right? To keep the monsters, the dragons, the drakes, etc., the plasma, the fire worms, the serpents away from them, or to draw them in, to capture them, to use that power, to harness that energy. You can see all the little pearls and all the little dragon balls that they're holding on to. Right? Dragons were also seen as guarding treasures, gold. They oftentimes lived in caves and whatnot, and that's because there were geoplasmas, earth dragons, that came up out of the earth too. Smoothie Princess 22, just subscribe to my channel. Welcome. This is a vortex of plasma that you'll see up in the sky from time to time. We can actually see these sometimes ourselves, but it's cartoonified as some sort of strange rubber-necked bird that's spiraling in on itself. And these are the more ancient style of Mesoamerican dragons, and you can see the person down beneath it, down there. But this is the reason why I chose this for the thumbnail, is this particular thing, which is this ball lightning, okay? Sometimes these are called You know, sometimes they're seen as like spirits or sprites, you could say, as pixies and fairies and things like that. But when they're very large and they're up there in the upper atmosphere, and they move about in the sky, you can see them today. If you pay attention, you can see way up there in the atmosphere. Occasionally, I see them all the time because I'm constantly watching the skies, but you can see plasmas, ball plasmas that are just moving about, gigantic, and they don't flash like planes or anything. They're much larger than the quote-unquote satellites that people point out. And then I'll point some other stuff out here too. This is the Tannin. Oftentimes you'll see these dragons, these serpent creatures, split off and they have multiple heads, right? Anytime you see one that has 7 heads, oftentimes that's actually the great dragon that's seen at the North Pole, which is also, biblically speaking, the great beast of Revelation that comes up out of the ocean, which is the Arctic Ocean or the Septentrio. And people will see like these 7 beams of light that shoot up from there. That's like the quintessential dragon. That's the father of all dragons, or the mother of all dragons. That's the great dragon, which is the largest one in the world that's seen, that's connected to the tree of life, which goes back to the biblical account of the Garden of Eden and the great serpent or dragon that guards, you know, the tree of life or whatnot. Let's see. Oh, originally. So this was originally what dragons really looked like. They were just plasma filaments in the air. Sometimes people would try to draw their faces in different ways because they saw them as entities. They saw them as living spirits, living beings. Smokeless fire, the jinn, right? Beings of power, beings that could imbue power onto you if you caught one. Just like, you know, catching a fairy or a leprechaun or things like that. You know what I mean? Same type of thing in like the movie BFG, where he catches those little dreams or whatever and he puts them in jars and stuff, right? Lightning in a jar, same type of thing. But this is originally how they were depicted. They didn't have legs, they didn't have arms or anything, but then over time they would add wings to them so that people understood this is not a snake that I'm drawing. This is not an animal that's slithering around on the ground. The snake is the closest creature that resembles these things that flew through the air, so they put wings on them. It's not that they actually had physical wings. They might look like they do from time to time, just as sprites that I've shown with you guys many times, shared with you many times. They can be interpreted as having horns and wings and parts of them that go up or come down or whatnot, but they're transient luminous events in today's world, and we just see flickers and flashes of them. But under conditions where the atmosphere is electrically amplified, they last much longer, and they roam about, and they're seen moving slowly in the skies, and, you know, their presence is known. But they would add wings to them, and that was a symbol to let you know these were flying, these were in the air, these were flying fiery serpents that came down from above. And then over time, as they were able to lower themselves closer to the ground, they would keep the wings, because tradition, you know, they would keep their tradition of keeping the wings on them, but then they added feet because they needed to portray that they could walk on the ground now too. This is the evolution of the dragon, right? All right, let me jump back into my notes here. We'll continue on. All right, we're talking about the word, right? We talked about the word drag, related words, track. So you have to think about how words change and the inflection of words change. Dialect and accents change words over time and their spellings over time too. So drak is also trak or trag, and it's just these different slight variations in how they're pronounced, but the words are the same. How they're pronounced and what they're associated with also changes over time. So eventually we get a multitude of different words. But if we go back and we reverse engineer those words, they have a root, they have a core, an origin, which is this one. So the word track. So these things left tracks in the sky. They drug along their energy as they would move about, these plasma balls flying through the air. These ball lightning, basically, is what we call it today. And they would have streamers that would just trail along or drag along behind them. So the word track or track is definitely related from the Dutch and the Low German word trek or trek, right? A drawing, a pulling force to move about. Trace is also trace is also directly related. So these things would trace out lines, literally drawing things in the air, drawing things in the sky, like a magic pen. You know what I mean? That's kind of how I imagine that. From the Proto-Indo-European, tercu, terku, which can also be pronounced derku, derku, terk, derk. Both have the same roots. Both have a similar or exact same meaning originally. Derk, Turk, Turk, trek, trek, drek, drawing, pulling, tracing, spiraling, twisting, with associated connections, right, of being twisted, being off, being different, moving at angles, which is angelic, literally. More related words, torque, right? To twist something, to torque it, to create force. And these are force. These are moved by force, right? It's electromagnetic force. More related words comes from the root word in Proto-Indo-European, which has a couple of different root words by itself, but it's ter, ter, right? So they moved along the land, along the face of the land, from one place to another. The land is called terra, or terra, right? Like terraforming. Ter, which means and implies things like to twist, to turn, to drill, to rub, to cross, as in to cross the land, to cross over, to pass over. Now we have an association with the Passover angel, the angel of the Lord that passed over or moved about over people's houses and from place to place on the land that could kill people and destroy people, right? And it's repelled by certain things and it's attracted to certain things. It also can imply things like a sign and a wonder, a boundary, a peg, and a post. And that's all from the root word ter, which comes from the Proto-Indo-European terku. Now the ku portion of terku, right, means two things. It means God, which is ku. It's also pronounced ka, right? God or a strong spirit, which is what these things were. It also can mean who, like one who is twisted or one who crosses over or one who is a sign, right? Now other related words excuse me, are in Sanskrit we have tarati, which is very similar to Tartan or Tartian or Tartarian, right? Those who had crossed over from the land at the North Pole, from the Garden of Eden, from Hyperborea, etc., to the Southlands, where they had crossed the boundary, which is the Pillars of Hercules. So, tarti, passing over, crossing over. From Old German, the word drek, D-R-E-K, or D-R-E-C-K, or D-R-E-C, drek, right? This is where you get Draco, dragon, Count Dracula, words like that. Drek is also pronounced threka, or treka, or treka, or threx, which means rubbish or trash. Now it's really interesting. 21 Pilots have a mascot that they use. It's a blue dragon and they call him Trash. Trash the dragon, right? There's an association with trash with these dragons because after the atmosphere depressurizes, it causes things to just float up into the air because of all that depressurization, all the atmosphere just getting sucked out of the dome and the firmament, and so things lift up into the air. It also causes just intense windstorms the world across. So things get blown away and lifted up into the heavens, and whenever that depressurization reaches an equilibrium, all that trash and junk and debris will fall back down. Everything that didn't make it out of the dome, right, will just fall back down into the earth, where we have just giant piles of trash and rubbish and whatnot. And these dragons will fly over these giant piles because there'll be places where they can feast, actually. So if these dragons are basically plasma eats gas. It's made of gas. So in order for it to live or to continue on, it needs to accumulate more gas, right? So you'll see things like in trash heaps or graveyards and places where you have organic matter that's rotting and decaying and decomposing and stuff. Those are releasing gases in mass up into the air. So these will be trash dragons. These will be serpents and seraphim and whatnot that will hover over graveyards and haunt these particular places in the world. There's also another Proto-Indo-European word, dreg, D-H-R-E-H-G-H, and that's just a loose transliteration of the original word, but it's dreg, which implies things like rough, to irritate, or to torment, right? If you got to think about this as well, these are electrical in nature. So they're going to have spines, and they're going to look like they have horns coming off of the front portion of them, especially as they're moving in one direction. All those spines and horns are going to be, pointing backwards as they move forward, right? So this is how they're depicted, and this becomes their mustaches and their beards flowing back and their horns and their spines and whatnot. Let's see. Drek, we talked about that. Dreg, rough, irritation, to torment. From Mycenaean and ancient Greek word trakos, which means jagged, prickly, rugged, rough, crackling, and harsh. Crackling is also the sound that these things made. So dragons made this crackling type of a roar. Why? Because it's a gigantic stream of electricity. They make sounds. They emit sounds and vibrations as they move past people and villages and stuff. So they would have this scream that's associated with them passing by. Now that, depending on how large they were and the amount of charge that was in the air and whatnot, that pitch that they made, the sound that they made, it could be a higher pitch or a lower pitch. It could sound like voices. It could sound like rushing waters. It could sound like static. It could sound like you know what I mean, like snow on the television or whatever. They can make all these different sounds. Sometimes they sound like crying. Sometimes they sound like voices, like people. So this is also one reason why the dragons were and are today portrayed as talking, that they can speak to people. But not only that, but as spirit forms, they are said to be able to connect with people, right? I call this docking, because they basically, these plasmas, whether they be ball form, like Attack of the Killer Tomatoes style, where they're rolling after people, attracted to their charge, or they be filaments or whatnot, right? They want to dock with you. Okay, they want to touch you. They want to reach out, and when they do that, they can exchange information, essentially, or they can charge your mind, and it seems like you're getting information, but in reality, they're amplifying the information that you already have that you're not even aware of. So they grant you mental powers, or they're seen as granting you mental powers. More word connections. Dork, right? So it used to say, you're a dork, right? Somebody that's different, somebody that's twisted, somebody that's off a bit, right? Saying that's where this comes from. You're basically calling them a dragon. Dork, Turk, right? So Turkish, Turkey, that's exactly where the origin and the root of this comes from. Those who crossed over, the different ones, barbarians, Tartarians, the strangers, strange people, people who changed their path, twisted, all these types of word implications. Twerk. So you might think the word twerk is just a made up millennial description of people who dance or whatever, but it's not. It means to twist. It means to do the twist, literally, just like dragons and spiraling plasma formations and stuff, just like you see here, right? Twerk. Tort, as we talked about. Tort can also imply things like four, right? So this points to like the four lands up at the North Pole as well. There's some connections there. Drat, when they're like, oh, something's gone wrong. Something's off, right? Drat. Trudge. Trudge. Troga. Trudge. And that means to drag along, right? To walk the weary walk. Drug also is directly related. Drug. Drug, right? Something was drug along the ground. It's been twisted. It's going on a different path. You know what I mean? Drug, something that can change you. Trog, as in troglodyte. Drat, which is an exclamation, something that people say whenever, something strange is happening. Trick is also directly related. Trick, Drak, Trick, Draco, Trico, right? These were the tricky beings, tricky serpents, tricky gods, you could say. I mean, I don't think that they're gods, but a lot of people saw them as gods, powerful spirits, mighty ones. Let's see. In Hebrew, Tan, as we talked about, the Tanin, translated as dragon, but depicted as a sea serpent, right? And oftentimes that word sea was more like a river, like a mighty rushing river, a gigantic river. The serpents of these rivers, right? Sometimes said to be locked under the rivers or locked away under the earth beneath particular large rushing rivers. Angels are also described as being locked up underneath rivers and stuff too. But why is that? Because those rivers are a current. They're following the electrical and electromagnetic currents of the earth itself. So we would expect to find beings that physically represent electromagnetically an actual electric current, right? So whenever you have these beings and you have a circuit, which is a current that just goes in a circle and it repeats itself, then you have an Ouroboros, which is the dragon that eats its own tail. It's not really eating the tail, it's just chasing its tail. It can't eat its tail, or it'll get smaller and smaller and smaller, and it'll just be a dot. You know what I mean? It'll never eat its own tail. It's just holding on to it, and it's moving in that direction. That's how they depicted a current, an electrical current, in the ancient world. Let's see. Quetzalcoatl. Let's talk about that one. So Quetzalcoatl is a South American version of a dragon, who's like a dragon god. And the word itself means feathered serpent, or a serpent that has wings, or appears to have wings. When you have these plasma filaments, right? In the modern world, they're calling them things like Steve and stuff like that. I don't really like that name for like something like a majestic dragon. But anyways, when you have them way up in the atmosphere and they're moving about high up there, then they're likely to produce residual glowing around them, which we call auroras, which those auroras spread out and flicker out, and they can look like all kinds of things through pareidolia. People will interpret it just like they look at a cloud and it starts to look like something. Though plasma is no exception. Auroras are no exception. One of the things that are commonly seen in auroras are bird wings or angel wings. Shout out to Angel Wings. Oh, she's in the chat right now too. How cool. Anyways, that's what people have seen up there in the heavens. They see these plasma filaments moving about, bigger and longer and closer than any aurora that we have seen in modern times. And they would sprout these wings. These would be thunderbirds. These would be phoenixes. These would be dragons. These would be sky serpents or fiery serpents up in the sky that could petrify, that could electrocute, that they were dangerous, right? But they could also help. So sometimes the dragons were just seen as evil because people didn't understand how plasma works, and they could get electrocuted by it. But if they understood how it works, they could utilize it. And here's another thing that you'll notice. Oftentimes, especially during the medieval period, and these are two different types of plasmas that are actually at war with one another right there. So that one's like one of the original dragons from Mesopotamia, and that one right there is basically a sprite. Anyways, when people fought dragons in medieval times, they would get full body metal suits on, and they would have long pointy lances or a sword, metallic, using metal to fight against these. If dragons originally, and I'm not saying that there were no phantazoids or, what many people in the world today consider to be like dinosaurs or gigantic physical animals, creatures, or monsters. That's a different subject. And I believe that they combined many different ancient fantastic elements together sometimes to create, fantasy creatures as we portray them today. But aside from just the physical animal that we would call a dragon, like a Komodo dragon or a giant alligator or anything like that, the knights would dress up in full body armor, and they would wear these huge helmets where they can't even see. They have slits, or sometimes looks like cheese graters on their face, just little dots. So they'd have to look around constantly to sort of make out the area where they're standing. Do you really think that if they were fighting a physical, actual reptilian giant lizard creature, that's what you want to defend yourself? I know that we just instantly think like, oh, well, you need a lot of armor, you need a lot of metal. Yeah, but to block your vision in such a way, there's no way you're going to use that to fight some creature like this. You want as much vision room, you want as much room to see as possible. You know what I mean? Not only that, but if these things are as heavy and as strong as the legends say that they are, if they're physical creatures, they're going to bend that metal and it's going to get stuck onto you or pierce into your skin or something. It could be even more dangerous for you. And then having a big long lance, like you're going to have one chance. Welcome to my channel, high five. You're going to have one chance to kill the dragon, you know what I mean? And a sword, even in the book of Job, whenever in the Bible, when Job is speaking with God and he's talking about the Leviathan, which a lot of people will, associate with the dragon. It makes it very evident and clear. If it's a physical creature with that much scales and all that stuff, you're not going to use a sword to kill that thing. That's why in the movies they always have to find like some kind of a weak spot or something like that. But here's the reality. If this is a plasma filament, right, following back and trailing behind ball lightning, then what you can do is you can use electromagnetic force against electromagnetic force, right? You can wear a giant Faraday cage in case you get struck or stung or bit or whatever by this electromagnetic lightning, because it will hit your metal and it will ground itself. It'll go right through your armor and it'll go right into the ground and you're fine. You're unfazed by the bite of the dragon. And so they would dress up in this giant Faraday cage, which we call heavy knight's armor today. But that whole story about the heavy knight's armor is just been blown out of proportion. That those were just the elite warriors and they're the ones that deserve to have the best armor to go into war to fight the other human beings or whatever. I very much disagree with that. I don't see the logic in that. I get it when it's just put forth simply like, wow, look at all those armor. If you forget the dragons existed, if you forget that we lived during a time whenever the actual environment around us was electromagnetically amplified and people could get shocked just walking around or going on a trip or exploring, especially if you're looking for these creatures who are known to guard precious metals because they're attracted to them. They're conductors, right? Gold is a conductor, one of the best. So the dragons would be around the gold, right? Or other precious metals or whatever. So when they saw the dragon retreating into some cave or whatever, that cave is full of precious metals. But you can't just go in there and just start mining with your metallic tools and stuff. You're all going to die because the dragons are guarding it, right? You need to have the knights go in there and clear it out and fight the dragons and send in your wizards or your wise men who understood electromagnetics and knew how to work with chemicals and magnets and other things like that to rid the area or to protect it, right? But over time, this was just all cartoonified. It was spiritualized. It changed into fantasy and magic and story form and stuff, when in reality, we're dealing with electromagnetics in the world, in a world that is electromagnetic, right? We just lack that today. We lack this spirit. We lack this energy today. You lack this energy today, which is why you're sleeping. People back then didn't have to sleep as much, at the very least. They didn't have to sleep as much. I'll say that for a fact. They didn't have to eat as much either. They were energetically charged as their very spirits resonated, as that energy flowed about them and through their very bodies, right? Which changed what we consider to be normal conditions in the world today. Right? Oftentimes you'll see these serpents, just like in that one, flying through the air, where their heads are split like the Hydra. That's what plasma does. It will split off and it'll separate as it starts putting its little feelers out there in the world. But these were the dragons that flew through the air. They undulated, which is one of the root words for Hydra or hide or hydrogen, right? Is one, to be hidden, like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. The word Hyde, Hyde, literally was like a tract of land that's hidden behind like a mountain, we'll say, or like at the base of a mountain or something like that. But anyways, it also meant and implied to undulate, right? To go under, or to move in this type of a fashion, to swoop down and then to go back up, which is what the dragon's movement was, because it's a plasma filament moving through the fluid that we breathe called atmosphere or air, right? And, you know, depending on where they were in the world, if they were in areas that had much more release of gases that they would take into themselves and absorb, they would get bigger, they would get stronger, they would become more powerful. But they could be starved to death, essentially, if you kept their food source, which was gas, away from them. This is also why people set out milk and cookies, and they had food and drink offerings for these types of spirits or monsters and dragons and stuff, because they wanted to put out stuff to allow it to decay, so that those gases would come up off of it. They would put it outside of their house away, so that the plasma would stop by and it would stay in those areas. They would do things purposefully to manipulate and to keep it in a particular place and to keep it away from this other particular place, which is usually where they sleep or where they live. So anyways, Quetzalcoatl, feathered serpent. That's basically one of, you know, there's many different types, but all the ultimate types and the quintessential roots of all these dragons lay at the North Pole. Okay, there is a beast, which is what it's referred to in the book of Revelation, which is this huge plasma sheath that's created by the Septentrio, or the 7 plasma volcanoes that surround Mount Meru at the center of the world. And that's seen as these 7 heads that erupt out of one main tree of life that shoots up, which is a geoplasma that shoots up out of the ground at the North Pole. But some people saw it as a 7-headed giant serpent, or Naga, right? Serpent, speaking of the word serpent, it's also the exact same word as seraph, or serap, or seraphim, right? The im is just plural. It's like putting an S on it. Seraphim, the seraphs. What is a seraph? Seraph literally means burning and fiery, glowing. That's what these creatures were. It's not like they were fireflies and they just had bioluminescence or anything. They literally, physically were light. They were actually made of light. They were light beings, if you would see them as being sentient or being, you know, spiritual or spirits or beings, right? This is what they were. This is what is inside of us. I think, this is my perception on this, but this is our spirit on the inside that flows through us and manifests physically throughout, creating the quote-unquote body. As a matter of fact, the word Naga, right? There's different interpretations of this, but I've got it pulled up here. It says here, in Italian, the etymology is borrowed from the Sanskrit word Naga, which means snake today, but probably ultimately from the Proto-Indo-European word Nogos, which means naked. Nogos, which is related to the word Nagas, which means naked, as in not having any type of clothing. Or if you're a spirit, it means not having a body. You're just a free-floating spirit. Now, this is interesting because it would give, you know, reconsideration to the story of Adam and Eve, who realized they were naked, or Nagas, and then they were clothed and given flesh. That's pretty interesting, I think. One thing I do want to say and clarify is I'm not talking about dinosaurs. I'm not talking about physical, actual monsters. Were there? Yes. And I talk about those all the time. I call those phantazoids. Okay? But that, as far as being like a dinosaur or something, I don't think so. I don't think so. I think that's a completely different topic. And that's the topic of phantazoids. So I'm really focusing on the spiritual, on the energetic that was changed and combined with the monstrous physical creatures to get this, right? You get like a horse snout. This is how they were described in the Far East. They were describing as having like a long snout in the front and then like having a ball in their mouth or a sphere or a glowing pearl or whatever, horns reaching back, right? This is all the streamers that are coming off of this ball lightning that's moving through the sky, that's moving about and following electrical currents, right? Those electrical currents it's attracted to or repelled away from come from gases and objects that it's either attracted to or repelled by. Specifically like magnets. A magnet, you can use a magnet to battle one of these dragons. You can use a sword as a lightning rod. A lightning rod, specifically that an object that will put positive ions out there to dissipate the negative ions. Right? You balance it out. These are just a charge. This is a buildup of negative or positive electrical energy. So to fight that, you just want to use the opposite charge and expose it to the opposite charge. Then you neutralize it. You're neutralizing the dragon. You're getting rid of and killing the dragon through physics, essentially. So anyways, yeah, not dinosaurs. These are streamers in the modern world. They're jets. Sometimes they're called blue jets and stuff, depending on the color that they produce. Sometimes they're purple or red. Sprites, spirits, ball lightning, pixies, things of that nature. That's all the notes that I had. I want to actually open up the chat too and see what you guys are talking about. So let me get my chat popped out and we'll just freestyle from this point. If you have any questions, feel free to, I do really good when people ask specific questions. If you have any questions, feel free to put those into the chat. Type in @JayDreamerZ to get my attention. What's up, Val? Hey, I haven't seen you in a long time. Good to see you. Pyramidian. Hey, I haven't seen you in a while. Nahuatl has to be related to Nagas. Yes, I agree. That sounds about right. So Geometric, good to see you in the chat. Isabella Live 2.0, good to see you. Let's see. El Salvador says, but all the legends are real. Oh, let me get my... I'm going to put your comments up here on the screen. One sec. Remember yesterday when I started my live stream and I didn't even realize I was live streaming? All right, I'm going to get the chat pulled up here and put onto the screen. And if you guys have any comments or questions, type in @JayDreamerZ and it'll highlight here on my side. And every time I do a live stream, just so you guys know, every single time. Hold on, why isn't this working? Oh, it's not visible. Let's do, bam. There we go. All right, cool. Every time I do a live stream, I forget something. Every single time. I just, my mind blanks out and I forget all kinds of information. So that's why I like to check out the chat, because sometimes you guys remind me of stuff that I was going to talk about or I was going to say, but I forget. And I'm after the live stream, immediately after, I'm like, oh man, I was going to make this point too. Some other examples of ancient dragons. We go back to the furthest example in Mesopotamia. Their version of the dragon was called Moshusu. Moshusu. That one was pictured as with not having wings. We have the Egyptian Apep, which is Apophis in the modern, right? And they're saying that Apophis is going to return. It is, okay? Dragons are going to return. You're going to see all of this return to our world because it's cyclical in nature. Let me jump back into the chat here. See